Hello everyone, I'm Yael Balla. I'm here to talk to you about design systems. Design system, you probably heard this term. It's the big promise of the UI world. Well, it will not solve world hunger or bring world peace, but it can sure ease our lives as developers. I'm a software architect and a front-end lead at Amenity Analytics, and I've been developing software for many years, and in the last years I'm focusing on front-end development. I worked on two sides of design system. One time I drove the implementation of a new design system for others to use, and the other time I updated our product UI to use the new global design system for the company. And of course I also worked in a project with no design system at all. So I'm here to share my experience with you. First, I would like to tell you a story. This is my 7-year-old son. He really likes to build in Lego, and he got this amazing ship for his birthday, and he started building it with confidence. He knows he has the building blocks, he has the documentation, and it's just a matter of time until he can build this one. And it took him several weeks, but eventually he built this amazing ship, and it was completely as the original design. I was looking at him and thinking, what makes Lego so easy to build? I think the answer is that there is a system behind it. They don't just provide you with bricks and the result image. They provide complete documentation and guidelines. And also, with experience, you learn how it works, because no matter what structure you are building, the basic principles of how to build with Lego stays the same. And this is also the idea behind design systems, not to just provide you the style guide and the UI components, to provide you a complete set of guidelines, rules, and provide you consistency with the toolkit, with the UI components and the design assets. So design systems, isn't that for designers? We're developers, right? And I'm here to talk with you about design systems from a developer point of view. So why a design system is important for developers? Who here worked on a project with more than one type of drop-down? Okay, 2 types of more than 2 types. Well, I was in a project with 4 types of drop-downs, and this is just an example. There were a lot of types of buttons and a lot of types of titles, and every time I got a new design from the designer, it also included something new. It included maybe a different layout that weren't appearing in anything else. There were suddenly breadcrumbs in the screen, or maybe sometimes even the default buttons got a new look. And this was a very frustrating process for me, because I had to redo all the same work every time. And I think this is a common problem when you don't have a clear design language. And this is the problem that design systems come to solve, to make sure designer and developer are working on the right things and not reinventing the wheel in every new project. So the agenda for today. In this session, I'm going to talk with you about the concept behind design pattern a little, and also go to the steps of building design system for your organization. And then we can see how we can enhance it and build on top of that. Let's start with some definitions. A design system is not just the style guide or the UI component. A design system is a set of design standard, documentation, and principles, along with the toolkit to achieve those standards. And ultimately, it can help us sync between code and design and improve the designer-developer process. Design system is supposed to be the source of truth of how our product should look like. And why do we need such source of truth? Because usually products that they have some kind of mileage. They were developed by different developers and designed by different designers and were in different point of time, and eventually it became inconsistent. And so the product itself can't be the source of truth. You need some kind of a separated location where you have these guidelines and everyone in the organization can look at. I think my slides are advancing, but we'll see what's going on with that. A design system has a few parts. The first layer is the building blocks. Color, maybe it's something to do with the clicker. The first layer is the building blocks, color, fonts, icons. This is the basic atoms that your design is based on. And on top of that, we can build the repeating patterns, components, templates. And on top of that, there is the more things that is more abstract, it's harder to achieve. For example, shared ways of working, your mindset when you're developing, what you need to put emphasis on when you design a screen. And what do I mean by that? Let's see a few examples and learn. As you know, all the big companies today have a design system or are building one. And in the spirit of open source, giving back to the community, they also publish it. And it's also a good PR. So what can we learn? Let's look on the examples. So here we can see a gallery of design systems. You can see there are a lot of them. And for example, Undesign, if you're not familiar, has a great component library. You can check it out. And there is also from Atlassian and Audi. There is many examples, and I encourage you later to go and take a look and drill down into the different ones and compare and see what you can take from each one. And today I want to show you Carbon. So Carbon is a design system that developed by IBM for IBM products, and they also released it as an open source. So let's look on what I mentioned as the abstract things. Here they call it the guiding principles. So you can see here that Carbon is open. For them, open, it means they release it as open source. They're not keeping it inside IBM. It's an open source, and you can use it and you can contribute to it, even though it's something that it's very fundamental into IBM products. Also, you can see here, Carbon is inclusive. What do they mean by inclusive? It means they put emphasis on accessibility, and we later show how it reflects on their components. And also, they have modular and flexible components, and they also want to build consistency. And this means that you don't when they add new components or then deciding what to add to the design system, they don't just look on the item itself. They look on how well it combines with other items and how it can work together with what already exists in the design system. Now let's look on the toolkit. What do the IBM Carbon bring to designers? So for designers, they have a sketch file. They have guidelines of what to do in order to start a new design. And they also have a sketch library with the symbols. What do they have for developers? For developers, they have UI component library for each of the major frameworks, React, Angular, Vue, and they also have guidelines for what to do if you're using some other framework, you can still use Carbon. So you can see that the principles of Carbon is open is they put a lot of effort into it. They want to make sure everyone can use it. Also, if we look on the guidelines, we can see here a whole section about accessibility and what it means for them and how they can answer all kinds of people and make sure all can use it. And like most of the design system, they also have their list of components, and they have, for example, patterns like how do you show disabled state. They also have patterns for filtering, loading, and data visualization, and things like that. So now let's go back to our presentation. At this point, you're probably thinking, a lot of resources are invested in this. Is this also for me? I'm not from Facebook. Maybe you are, but I guess, is it only for people who's working in Facebook, Google, Microsoft, IBM? So I think that every product, every project can benefit from a design system, even if you're just a few people and you don't have the bandwidth to create such system. You still want to reuse your design and reuse your components. And not every design system have to be big, like carbon or material design or lightning. These are for, I don't know why it's jumping. And this is for user organizations. And so they have to be very comprehensive. But as long as you're thinking about reusing your design and components, and that's it. And also, if you're not planning to build a design system, you still can benefit from the principles behind it. And this means to define your design tokens, to separate your visual layer, to make sure your component can still be reusable in different projects. And this can really help you build a good infrastructure for your front-end application. So what are the steps for implementing a design system? The first step will be to create alignment, because design system, as you saw, it's just not the developers, it's alignment in the organization. You also need to scope the project, because design system is a product and it's used with other product inside the company. And there is the actual work of defining the design tokens and the UI components. And I think the most important thing is how you share it and how you make it available for everyone in the organization. So let's start with create alignment. So the first step in this starting design system is to get some kind of buy-in from the organization, and we can push for it, we can advocate for it, but eventually we need other stakeholders in the organization because we want to work together. And this requires a conceptual change. It's not the developer work alone or the designer work alone. This is a combination of different roles in the organizations. And in Vision, for example, where I worked, then the team for the design system was a designer, a developer, and a technical writer working together. And of course, there was a product manager that helped to get all the requirements. So together, you can define your rules and guidelines. This is what I said as the more abstract thing. And you can decide what you want to put emphasis on. So, for example, we saw what the guiding principles for carbon are. And for lightning, for example, it was clarity and beauty. And for you, it's whatever you decide. You can decide it's your brand principles. And then you can also think about what it really means. You don't just want to define it. You also want to think about how it will affect your implementation. And another prerequisite step is to conduct a visual audit of your current design. This will help you to understand how much of an undertaking this process might be. Do you want to use what you have today? Do you want to completely rewrite it? Do you have to do a lot of alignment in your code in order to do that? And this also brings us to the next step and this brings us to scoping the project. The best advice here is to start small. Start with a few components, update your API and tools, and make sure they're adapted, and then continue to build on top of that. And what questions can help us focus? So the first question is, what do you want to start with? Every components have a few products. Every company have a few products. For example, the company sites, the new initiative, the legacy product, the back office tool, I'm sorry. So how are you going to implement it? Every company has a different project, so you also have different frameworks, and you need to decide what do you want to start with, what is your delivery for the developers. In Amenity Analytics, where I work today, all our projects are with React, so it's easy. You can just make a UI component library. But if you have multiple framework, you might want to actually, at the beginning, to provide just a CSS file with definitions, for it will be easy for everyone to consume. And another question which is important is it a shared effort or a dedicated team? Not all companies have resources to put a team with a few people just working on that. So it's very easy to actually share the effort. So a team will contribute a component, and every designer will contribute a layout, but you still need to have some kind of governance. You still need to have someone who knows what's in there in the design system and knows what to do about how to add new components, and also will know how to update the infrastructure. For example, if you're using styled component and you want to upgrade the version of it, then you need someone who is governing that and updating it, keeping control. And so now we have alignment, and we also scope the project. We know what we're going to work on. So we are starting with the actual work, defining the building blocks. So the building blocks are your atoms. It's the named entities, the smallest pieces that your UI is composed of. You probably heard the term design tokens. Design tokens are property value pairs with semantic meaning. What do I mean by that? It's actually anything you can define using a CSS variable. It can be color, or it can be font, it can be size or spaces, and then you can reuse it in your application. I will show several methods of using the design tokens, and these options supposed to help you to write little to no CSS at all. So the first option, if you're working in a more traditional way, is actually to use utility CSS classes. For example, sorry, I jumped ahead. So you want to first define these meaningful CSS variables. You don't want to have a lot of colors spread around your application. You don't want to have a lot of sizes spread around your application. You want to have a certain set of colors, and this set of colors should have a semantic meaning. You don't want to use the color red, you want to use the color danger. And this will also later allows you to replace themes for your application. The same for sizes. You can think about sizes as t-shirt size, small, medium, large, and then you can combine it. And this is what I said earlier, that I will show several options for reusing these design tokens in the application. For this slide shows the utility classes. You can define automatically define classes that will allow you to style your divs without writing new classes. For example, we can see here a text that has a small margin, and all I had to do is write utility margin small as the class name, and I don't need to define a new CSS class for it. And another option of reusing the design tokens is to define components that provide styling. For example, the title component. It actually displays, make sure this text is displayed as a title with the correct font, with the correct size, and there's also probably should be a component for a paragraph or for description or tooltip. And you can also enhance it and add components for padded that will automatically add the default padding for the children, or you can add components for margins or whatever you need. And if you're using CSS in JS, you can use a style system. It's a very nice library that allows you to to define your design tokens in a central location using a theme file, and then you can reuse it when you style your components. For example, this one is with style component, and you can see I don't know what the font is, I don't know what the space or the color, I just import it from the global definition and reuse it. Technicalities aside, the most important thing here is that there are no more one-offs. You have a signed contract with designer, and this makes the developer hands-off a lot easier, because you get a design and you see the color and you know what the meaning of that color, and if there is a new color that you don't have the design token, the const value for it, then you can go back to the designer and tell him, look, there is a new color. What does it mean? Is it an error, maybe? Or is it something new that we need to add to the global definition? And then you can have some kind of discussion. And this will help you make sure that your code is organized, and also that you will have consistency in the UI for the user. And now that we have defined our visual language, and we have the smallest pieces, now we can create the patterns and the UI components. But before that, you probably ask, there are so many component libraries out there. Can't we just reuse an existing component library? So, and the answer is yes. You probably want to reuse a design, a certain implementation. And I can say that when we first started to develop a design system, what we really did is actually taking an existing one, wrapping it with our theming, and then to allow our users to use something. And then we started to replace it and build our own components exactly as we want it to be. So I think the real question here is which design library actually match my needs, because there are a lot of them out there, and every design library allows you to add some customization to it. But if you find yourself changing every styling, every property, every animation, then it's probably not the right choice for you. You probably know React Material UI. It's very popular. I would like to demo how you can style it, and what do I mean by theming it in a central location. Okay, so this is a project I have, and this project is really simple. We'll run it. And now it will be opened in the browser, and we'll see just a simple application with an application bar, some kind of navigation, and the form. And this is the default look and feel of Material UI. I changed nothing. Sorry, another one. Where is the WebStorm? Okay. So React Material UI allow you to wrap your application with a theme, and all you need to do is add a theme provider on top of your application, and then you can I'm sorry, I didn't say that, but all my examples will be in React. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and Angular people, you have the same thing, but for Angular or Vue. So let's look on the theme. The theme, I would like first to change the colors. So I can define a palette and select my primary color and my secondary color, and there's also a lot of options for color, but this is the simplest one that I chose, is to change it to white, add some kind of green into the screen. I also want to change the typography because let's say my users would like to see the text as monospace, and now it will rerun, and let us see that again. Will reload. And I change how it looks, right? But it's not completely different. For example, I don't like this ripple effect. So I already read the documentation, and I know that in order to change the ripple effect, I need to change the default property for all the buttons. So I'm changing disable ripple true. So this is what I mentioned when I said you don't want to go to every button in the application and change this property. You want to do it in a central location. And this was also easy, right? Now I don't have the ripple effect, and I like it better, or at least my designer like it better. And but I still don't like this shade. And I want to change that. So this will be a little more tricky. So here I need to understand where this shade is coming from. So if I will look here, I will see that the change is coming from a paper component, elevation 4. So now I can go back to my code and override these settings, this CSS. So I will override the paper component, the elevation 4 class, and set the box shadow and the border to what I want it to be. And now it will be reloaded, and it's just a line. Okay. So why am I showing you this? Because sorry. And why am I showing you this? Because if you choose to use an existing component implementation, so make sure first to find the one that best match your needs, and the second is to put all the customization in one place, because most of the interfaces for the component are similar, but the customization is different, and if you put it in one place, you have better control, you can change it, and it just best practices. And if you choose to create a library, which at one point you probably will get to it, you still don't need to start from scratch. You can separate your visual layer to take the code that you already have. You can combine standalone components from different open source options, and you can still make sure that they are all combined together and in one place. So you'll have better control of who is using and what is used in your project. And if you're deciding to build a new component, one of the major questions is customizations. We all were in a place when we wanted to use a component, but it didn't completely match our needs, and we wanted to use it, but we couldn't, so we had to rewrite it from scratch. And here we were building a component for the design system. So in one hand, we don't want people to change its looks because it might not adhere to the design system principles. But on the other hand, there are things that we can't anticipate. So what can we do in order to make sure our component is reusable? There are three things I recommend looking when you look into a component. The first one is styles. Again. It's just that I'm not supposed to look on the screen, because then you will see my back. So I want you to see my slides. Here. Yeah. So the first thing is to see the styles. Like I said, you don't want them to completely change the style, but they probably do need to have some control over it, because sometimes styles are not related to the design system. Sometimes you want to change a Z index or add in display flex or things that one of your users will eventually find himself need to do, and you don't want to change your code in order to allow him or her to do that. So allow them to change the styles is actually important. Also, you want them to be able to propagate their properties into your internal components. It can be adding a test ID for automated testing. It can be area label if they want to add some accessibility information. And this can be simple as just getting the properties and propagate them internally. And another great way to allow them to control is to give them control on what to render. If you're separating your components into smaller pieces, and they allow them to inject what to render from the outside, that it can really make your component useful. For example, allowing them to add an icon into a drop-down, or control how a row looks like in a table. And at this point, I would like to clear up a misconception. Not every shared component should be part of the component library. The component library for the design system deals with abstractions and deals with building blocks, and not with concrete items. For example, if you have some kinds of document property dialogue that is shared across your products, you probably want to define a library for it, and you want it to be shared across the projects, but it doesn't mean this dialogue is part of the design system. You probably want to define this type of dialogue in the component, a dialogue with a title, with a content, with 2 buttons, and allow them to take the components and integrate it within, but you don't want the concrete properties dialogue to be in the design system. We managed to pass this step. We have the design tokens and we have the component library, and now we need it to reach our users. So how can we do that? So as we said, the design system is a product, and it's a source of truth. And because it's a product, it means it has users. So who are our users? We have developers, designers, technical writers. It can be marketing, it can be product, actually everyone in the organization. And each one of them needs a different delivery. So let's start with developers. Developer needs a package to be available for consumption. There are very good tools in order to publish packages today. You can use NPM, which is the global package repository, but you can also use your private package repository if you have any, if it's Artifactory or if it's GitHub. So you can have it privately or shared publicly with the world. And when you I usually I use Webpack to build my applications, and when I build a standard application, it's actually a main script that has it's executable, that when you run it, it starts to render. And it's actually doing the opposite. All the code is encapsulated within my bundle, and I don't want it to be exposed from the outside. But when I'm building a library, I need to have the code to be exposed, and I don't want it to render anything by default. So this means I need to configure my build to run as a library. And for that, in Webpack, I can just define that this is a library, give it a name. And I also need to define the library target, because this will help me. This will tell how I can use it. So common.js means I can use require or import in order to consume the components. Also, when you're starting to release your library, it also means you need to have versions, and you need to manage it, because you don't want user to be coupled to your latest version, because sometimes you do changes and they want to decide when they want to take this change. So semantic versioning, and it's the standard way for defining versions for libraries, and I recommend use semantic versioning, a semantic release. It's a package that automatically advanced your versions according to the commit message, and you can also integrate it into your CI. For example, if you write fix in the commit message, it will generate a patch version, and if you write major, it will generate a major version. And this makes the whole management easier. And also you can change the message format, of course, to whatever you want. And this is a really nice tool. And this brings us to our next users. The next user type is the designers. I will not drill down to the different tools designers have, but there are many. There are Figma, there is InVision, there is Photoshop, Sketch, Zeppelin, and I think the things that we want to achieve is that the designers will base their design on what that is currently available for the developers. They don't want to use some future design that no one implemented yet, and you don't know if someone will ever implement. You want to base your design on what you currently have. So there is a lot of ways to do that. For example, React Sketchup that can take React components and create sketch file out of it. And there is also HTML Sketchup that can take any kind of web app and turn it into sketch file. And this makes sense because designers want to see the source of truth as well. And when we work with design system, we say that the code is the source of truth. And in order for our design system to really be accessible for all type of users, we need to build a website. And it can be a very simple website, just a static website that shows the design principles, what resources provided, and real life components that users will be able to play with the components and with their properties and see how it changes on screen. So you can develop your own website. It's probably rather easy, but you don't have to, because there are really good tools that can help you generate a website for you. For example, DocZ, there is Style Guidist for React or Vue, and there is Storybook. I personally like Storybook. I use it a lot, not just for generating the static site. It's actually allows you to implement components in isolation. It's a UI component development environment, and it matches the design system use case because you can define stories for your components, and together with the documentation, you can generate the static website. So Storybook themselves have a design system. So let's look on that. So this is how the new version of Storybook looks like. This is the component they're using to actually build themselves. So this is nice. And you can see here the code and the actual components. And why did they build such system? You can see that they actually have a very strong community, and they want to encourage people to contribute to Storybook. So they actually invested time in using their own product to document their design system. So now we will demo Storybook. All you need to do in order to configure Storybook is to run this command, npx storybook CLI, and it will automatically detect your project type and add all the configuration you need. So in this project, I already ran this command to save you the time, and it added the configuration into .storybook folder. And also, there is now a stories folder in my project with 2 default stories. And I also have two new tasks in my package.json that allows me to run Storybook. So now it will start Storybook, and I can see the default empty Storybook with some kind of intro and example. Here we have a navigation of my components. Here is the canvas for the component, and a panel with that can provide additional information. For example, here if I'll press the button, I can see what is sent when I press the click in the on-click event. And I can see the different states for the button: text and emoji. This is rather thin, and how can I add content into Storybook? So in order to add content, I need to add stories. So what is a story? A story is just one state of the component, and you can show it by rendering the component with different properties. You can show it by rendering it as part of a form or combine it with other components. It's simply a render function, so you can do whatever you want. So let's add a story. First, we want to delete the default ones because they are not really usable. And I want to add a story. So first, I'm importing my components from its original location. The stories are part of your code, the same as your tests. And they can also be used as visual tests to the components. So if I have a search bar, I can give this section a title. It's showing the stories for search bar, and I want to add a simple story with a placeholder. So let me look on that now. Supposed to refresh, and now I have a search bar with a placeholder, and I can live edit it, and it looks exactly as my application. Now I also want to add more functionality. Storybook by default arrives very thin, and you can decide what you want to add. So, for example, I want to add some information on my component. So I would like to add to this to the with placeholder story a description of my component, and I also want to enable the info add-on. So I'll add this global code that actually decorate every story with the info add-on. Let's see how it looks. So now I have this button, show info, and when I press on it, I can see the search bar, I can see the description I added, I can see the source for the story, and the different prop types for this component. And I got it completely free, just with these 2 lines of code. We started with Carbon, so let me just demo. They actually have a storybook configured for their components. You can see here there is a lot of functionality in it. For example, you can change the title and it will affect the UI, and this is nice. So yay, we did that. We have the design system, we share it across the organization, and now we can sit back, right? So there is a lot more going on that you can, there's a lot more you can add and build on top of it. Because design system is an iterative process. For example, you can close the loop between the developer and designer handoff. Here is, for example, in Vision Inspect. When I select a component, I also see the name of the component in the design system. And I don't need to guess where it is coming from. I have this documented in the style guide I get from the designer. And also a very popular use case is visual test. I can, now that I have a state for each component and I have the component in isolated location, I can add visual test so that if a change happens with the component, I can get an alert on that and decide what to do. This was actually a requirement from a designer I worked with. She asked, I want to know every time a basic component is changed, and I don't want to have surprises when I look on the final product. And so at the time, I didn't have a solution for her, but now with Storybook or Style Guidist, we can have a solution and have and actually integrated into our CI/CD, so that every time a PR changes look for a component, the designer will get a notification and will have to approve this PR. And this brings us to the question of who is managing all these tools and processes. It's not designers because they're the creative part. It's not developers because they're doing the product, and it's also not the DevOps because they're responsible for production. So this brings a new hat to the organization, Design Ops. And Design Ops are responsible for tools to manage the design workflow and design process. It can be developer hands-off, it can be unit research, user testing, and all kinds of tools you can build on top. So design system also brings the ability to create a process around the design, and not just the immediate deliveries of UI components and style guide. So this concludes my talk about design systems. So to recap, we talked about the concept behind design system a little. I hope it shed some light about what design system is. We also talked about how to create a design system in your organization, create alignments, scope the project, create the design tokens, UI components, and share it with the world. And also we saw some examples of what's next, what you can build on top of that. And so this is a design system is only the beginning. And if there is one thing that I want you to take from this talk is break the silos, work together. I think that if designer and developer will work together, building pixel perfect application will be like playing with Lego. So go to your fellow designers, ask them what design system they are using, what they are basing your design about, what's the gap between the design and code, and work together. I will upload my slides, so we'll have these links and also all the slides available for you. And thank you very much. I'm available here for face-to-face questions, or if you want to ask me in LinkedIn or mail, you are welcome. And have a great conference. Thank you.